In this module, we're going to discuss Roman religion and ritual. In order to do that, we're going to survey some categories of information that inform us about the nature of both religion and ritual in the Roman world. First concept to take on board is the notion of votive religion, which is an important mechanism that informs us largely about how Roman religion operated. With the ritual Latin formula, da ut des, translated to mean I give so that you will give, we can understand the nature of the interaction between the Romans and their gods, whereby the making of vows, or pledges, or promises, and the giving of gifts to the cult of the divinity created a sort of contractual relationship between the worshipper and the divine. Theoretically, we see this as reciprocity of exchange, as defined by Durkheim in 2001, the mechanism of the sacrificial system itself, as an exchange of mutually invigorating good deeds between the divinity and his faithful, meaning that the exchange, the fulfillment of the promise, and the exchange of gift is a way of ensuring that the divinity gives credence to the request made by the worshipper. These votives can take a lot of different forms depending on the social and financial station of the worshipper. At left here, you see an Etruscan votive object, a very high status one, made in bronze, a very valuable gift. But these votives run the range of qualities and types. For instance, here, a number of so-called anatomical votives. One of the most frequent requests to be made of a god is for healing, either overall healing or the specific healing of a certain aggrieved, sickened body part or organ. You see votive limbs here at the right, legs and feet. And in the lower left here, you see votive models of internal organs and external organs as well. Genitalia, hand. These are pledges made to a god, hopefully in exchange for healing power. Votive religion exists at all levels of Roman religious practice, from personal gods all the way up to the state cults. Very important to carry through and fulfill your vow if you make it. Personal religion and household religion is another important aspect to consider. The Lares and the Penates are protective spirits who look after the safeguarding of the household and also of the state. These are groups of spirits without individual names, and by offering regular sacrifice to them, the Romans believe that in turn the Lares and the Penates will offer protection from various kinds of misfortune and will generally ensure good luck. Lares break down into further categories. The Lares compitales guard crossroads, Lares domestici safeguard the house, Lares familiares the family, Lares per marini the sea, and so are prayed to by sailors, and the Lares priestess are the state Lares. You see an example here of preserved Roman household shrine and altar where the Lares could be honored with small sacrifices, often on a daily basis. Here, another example of a Roman household shrine, as well as sculpted and painted depictions of the Lares. The Lares here in the painting with a priest sacrificing at the center. These statuettes of Lares and divinities as well. So the Lares, very important part of daily life. Religion and healing, we've already mentioned in the context of votive religion. An important early cult brought to Rome and situated on the Tiber Island, the only island in the Tiber River, is the cult of the Greek healing god Aesculapius, established in Rome in 293 BC during a time of plague. The Roman Senate consulted a sacred priestess who indicated that they should build a temple to Aesculapius. They should send to Aesculapius's main cult at Epidaurus in Greece, and they should bring back a statue of the deity so that hopefully he could help Rome deal with the plague that it was facing. Since Aesculapius' sacred symbol was the snake, you see the snake curving around his staff here. A snake was brought from Epidaurus. It disembarked on its own accord in the Tiber and chose the island. And so the temple was said to be built there. You can see the remains of the relief on the Tiber Island, fashioned to look like the prow of a ship, with Aesculapius here inside of the box, once decorating it. Leading Roman politicians were also leading religious figures. In the Roman world, there's no concept of the separation of church and state, so political officials, both in the Republic and during the Empire, were head priests. Here you see the Emperor Augustus, the so-called Via Labicana Augustus, because the statue was found on the Via Labicana in Rome sometime after 12 BC. He is here in his role as chief priest, Pontifex Maximus. He is depicted capite velato, meaning his head is covered. Any priest making a sacrifice or priestess would have to cover his or her head to show proper respect to the gods. Here another scene, this of the Emperor Marcus Aurelius, late 2nd century AD, similar role, performing a sacrifice in front of the temple of Jupiter. So the emperor would preside over the chief rituals of the Roman state religion. One of the main kinds of sacrifices demanded by the gods, blood sacrifice, the so-called Suovetaurilia, a triple sacrifice of pig, sheep, and bull, thus the name Suovetaurilia, a high-level sacrifice of the state religion. Certain parts of the sacrificed animals would be burnt on the altar. You see the altar here in the relief, as offerings to the gods. And then the good parts of the animal, the meat, would be cooked up and served to the celebrants who have come to the ritual. In some parts of the Roman world, the emperor himself and the emperor's family were worshipped. A cult, an imperial cult, grows up mostly outside of Italy, in the provinces. Here at Vienne, in France, the temple dedicated to Augustus and Livia. In some parts of the Mediterranean world, there was a long tradition, going back at least to ancient Egypt, of celebrating the living ruler as a living god. Now, to Italians, ancient Italians, this was not a popular notion. But in some parts of the Roman Empire, the emperor was worshipped during his lifetime as a god. In many cases, at his death, even in Italy, he transformed into a god. As we see here, the apotheosis of the Emperor Titus, the elder son of the Emperor Domitian. Titus ruled briefly, 79 to 81 AD, and you see here the depiction in his arch of his becoming a god. Apotheosis, meaning the becoming a god. So here Titus, you see his head and shoulders, going all off to heaven on the back of an imperial eagle. In the following century, we see remains of another monument, the apotheosis of the Emperor Antoninus Pius and his wife Faustina, around AD 61. You see them here going off to heaven, Antoninus and Faustina, atop a winged male representation flanked by imperial eagles, leaving behind Rome and the Campus Martius. They go off to become gods after their death. There again, Antoninus and Faustina. So there is a tradition of deifying the emperor, the good emperors, at death. Ancient Rome is a city of multiple simultaneous religions. There are a number of so-called foreign cults, imported cults, that could be found in the city. This map shows you distribution of foreign cults that we know about in the city. These are in addition to the standard state cults of the Greco-Roman pantheon. So there's quite a lot of diversity in the religion of the ancient city. The Romans began importing cults from quite early. We've already mentioned the cult of Aesculapius, brought in the 3rd century BC. In the 2nd century BC, the temple and cult of Cybele, also known as Magna Mater, is imported to the Palatine Hill. Magna Mater comes originally from Turkey, Asia Minor, and her cult is established in Rome officially on the 11th of April in 191 BC on the Palatine Hill. You see a reconstruction drawing of the temple here. And here you see the location of the temple highlighted on a model of the city of Rome there, the temple of Magna Mater on the Palatine. Just like the temple of Aesculapius on the Tiber Island, the Magna Mater cult has an interesting arrival story where a woman, Claudia Suntike, plays a role in dragging the ship that was bringing the cult of Magna Mater. Got stuck in the mud in the Tiber. Claudia Suntike is said to help drag it, physically drag the ship out of the mud and bring it to Rome. This happening at the end of the 3rd century, again by command of divine mandate. Here, Cybele's statue from about 50 BC. Cybele is one of the oldest goddesses in the Mediterranean, a sort of primeval mother goddess who can also control nature. Becomes a very important god in Roman Italy. An interesting and definitely messy cult exercise connected with Cybele in the 2nd through 4th centuries AD is the so-called Tauroctony. One of the first attested examples at Rome is in AD 139, where those wishing to be initiated into the cult, as you see in the diagram here, would bathe in the blood of a slaughtered bull, positioning themselves in a sacred pit so that the bull's blood would sort of rain down on them. And this is an initiation into a secret cult so that one could learn the mysteries of Cybele. At Ostia, the port city of Rome, is the large temple, the campus of the Magna Mater, with a purpose-built area, you see it here, for the performance of the Tauroctony. Here we see terracotta antefixes, also from Ostia, celebrating her arrival at the port of the Tiber. Being a part of these cults also had a social value. Priests and priestesses would often advertise in their funerary monuments, inscriptions, and also sculptures their roles as officials of religious cults. Here, the funeral relief of a priestess of the Magna Mater cult, with recognizable iconography indicating her role as a priestess of the goddess. Magna Mater was not the only game in town. In terms of foreign imported deities, the Egyptian goddess Isis also was very popular. Isis also promised life after death to her followers and was long associated in the deep Mediterranean past with the ability to overcome death, having resurrected her male consort Osiris after he was killed and chopped up into small pieces. Isis restored and reanimated him. Her followers are also recognizable in art. Here, an Isis priest carrying a ritual bucket known as the situla, as well as the sistrum, a sacred rattle, a noisemaker connected with Isis worshippers. One of the best preserved Isis temples in the entire Mediterranean world comes from Pompeii. Here, a photo from an early photo from about 1882 of the temple of Isis. This temple was preserved by the catastrophic destruction of Pompeii, was first excavated in the 1760s in the theater district of the city. It's very well preserved. It shows us via its dedicatory inscription that leading citizens served as its patron. So it's not a minor marginalized cult, but one that leading citizens of the city care about. It had suffered major damage in an earthquake of AD 62, a precursor event to the final destruction, and was being repaired in the last days of Pompeii. You see its plan here, a small central shrine, gathering rooms, as well as rooms and structures for initiation. Just like Magna Mater, The Isis cult requires initiation, in this case a ritual bath in the building here, indicated with the arrow, ritual bath in sacred water in order to be considered a member of the cult. There you see the central temple building at Pompeii, and adjacent to it, sort of turning 90 degrees to your left, the purgatorium, the initiation building for emerging cleansed as a member of Isis cult. The frescoes from this temple show us the Isis worshippers in action. Here, two views of the same painting. Priests, the distinctive shaved head, and a long sort of skirt-like garment gathered about the chest, marking them as Isis officials. A third popular imported god is the Iranian sun god Mithras. Mithras, who is at the back of the Zoroastrian religion, which is still practiced today, is a sort of a heroic sun god, often shown in this characteristic pose of slaughtering a bull. Just like the Isis cult and the Magna Mater cult, you had to be initiated, and you probably also had to be a male to be a member of the Mithras cult, and you learned by stages the secrets of Mithras and his ways, and the final revelation of the cult said to be the ability to transcend death, to overcome death and come back from the underworld. Mithras is worshipped usually. His meeting house is a semi-subterranean room with long benches at the sides for the initiates to sit on, and always this image of Mithras killing and sacrificing the bull, both in sculpture and, as you see here, also in painting. Mithras is very popular in general terms in the Roman Mediterranean. He's especially popular with people who move about a lot. This includes big categories like merchants and soldiers. Here at Ostia, the port city of Rome, every little number here on this map indicates a known Mithras shrine. They are quite numerous. So Mithras worshippers would not be hard to find in ancient Rome. At Ostia, this is the so-called Mithraeum of the Seven Spheres. You see some of the preserved mosaic decoration of the meeting hall and the mosaics on the benches for the initiates to sit on, with sacred icons representing the stages of knowledge, stages of initiation into the Mithras cult. And there the ground plan, central space flanked by benches, altar at the end there. Mithras is connected with the sun, very powerful god. He often has two helpers with him, Cautes, the sunrise, and Kaltopates, the sunset. You see them sort of flanking him here in this relief. He becomes synchronized with the unconquered sun, which in Latin is Sol Invictus, and represents this very important concept of a solar deity. The Mithraea, the temples of Mithras, are also evident at Rome. You see a number of them here plotted on the plan of the city of Rome. It's a very widespread, very important cult in the imperial period. We also mentioned that Mithras is popular with those who move about. Some who move about more than others are soldiers. Here, way at the northern frontier of the Roman Empire, on Hadrian's Wall, the ancient site of Brocholitia, which is now called Carobur. There's a Mithraeum of the 2nd century AD, destroyed in the late 4th century, that sits just next to the fort, a Roman military road, the Roman fort, outside the fort's walls, the Mithraeum. You can see it here, as it is today, Mithraeum of Carobur, just outside of the fort's walls. And inside the central space of the worship hall, altars dedicated by officers of the Roman legions stationed at Carobur, showing their devotion, their dedication to to Mithras. We also, when this was excavated in the 1950s, there was also evidence of bull sacrifice, which, as we've seen from the images, is key to Mithras worshippers. If we were to read the central altar here, we would find that it's dedicated by a leading military officer, this one, and it says, "To the invincible god Mithras, Marcus Simplicius Simplex, the prefect, willingly and deservedly fulfilled his vow," his votum. So this is still a votive offering, an object given to the god as a thank offering. Judaism is also evident in Roman Italy. One of the most important early synagogues located anywhere in the Mediterranean is found at Ostia, a 1st century AD synagogue that has been the subject of a lot of study and excavation. You see its ground plan in a couple of versions here, and the 7-branched menorah on a column capital. Another view of the ground plan showing us that there's a resident community of Jewish worshippers here at Ostia in the 1st century. Here, a reconstruction of the Torah shrine at Ostia. So for those who study the emergence of synagogue architecture, this is a very important early example. In some cases, there are some pretty weird things to mention about Roman religion, especially in terms of people trying to make big changes. A relatively minor emperor of the early 3rd century AD, known as Elagabalus, tries to change the Roman state religion completely. Elagabalus comes from the province of Syria, and he tries to replace Jupiter as the chief Roman god with a Syrian god, Yahagabal, thus his name Elagabalus, derived from the name of the god. He brings this god to Rome. The historian Herodian tells us a 6-horse chariot carried the divinity, the horses huge and flawlessly white, with expensive gold fittings and rich ornaments. No one held the reins, and no one rode in the chariot. The vehicle was escorted as if the god himself were the charioteer. Elagabalus ran backward in front of the chariot, facing the god and holding the horse reins. He made the whole journey in this reverse fashion, looking up into the face of his god. This Syrian god is represented, it's hard to see on this coin, but by a meteor. A black meteorite was the cult object at the main cult site of this divinity at Emesa in Syria. You see a coin here from a later emperor showing the black meteorite in its temple at Emesa. And Elagabalus, I should say that Yahagabal means the god mountain, or god of the mountain. And Elagabalus tried unsuccessfully to make this the new state god of the Romans. He tried hard, but he was not a popular guy, and it didn't work out so well. He did build, during his brief reign, a massive temple on the Palatine Hill, remains of which you see here, and also in this next slide, to house the cult. All that remains is the enormous platform of the temple. Nothing of the superstructure survives. So this change was not embraced by the Romans. Was not a popular move on his part. When Constantine arrives on the scene in the 4th century and becomes the single ruler of the Roman Empire, the Constantinian concept and use of Christianity comes up. Christianity was a pretty minor cult up to this point. Isis and Mithras worshippers were much more numerous than were Christians. Constantine synchronizes his own image with the unconquered sun, Sol Invictus, and also embraces Christianity as part of his official propaganda. He issues, jointly with other Roman leaders in 311, the so-called Edict of Toleration, which tried to set an end to Christian persecution, mostly because Christianity was increasingly popular amongst the soldiers in Constantine's army. By 313, Constantine puts forth the Edict of Milan, an official state recognition of Christianity as a religion. Once Constantine has consolidated his power, he tries to encourage a sort of a formalization of Christianity, convening the First Council of Nicaea in 325, coming up with the Creed of Nicaea, which was an attempt to create a uniform Christian doctrine and to settle internal doctrinal debates, which were not settled and which continued to go on and would eventually lead to a split, a schism between Eastern and Western Christianity. Constantine, as a deft politician, tries to make space, literally make space, for Christian sanctuaries at Rome, and you see him trying to fit them into pre-existing urban landscapes, notably the Church of St. Peter's on the Vatican Hill, the Lateran Basilica, the Church of Santa Croce in Gerusalemme, Santa Maria Maggiore, and others that Constantine tries to sort of fit into already sort of densely occupied urban landscape. Outside of the walls, up in this direction, the building that we know as Santa Costanza, a tomb meant for members of Constantine's family, becomes a Christian building as well. An oratory for the later Church of St. Agnes outside of the walls, Sant'Agnese fuori le mura, along the Via Nomentana, about 3 kilometers outside of the city walls of Rome. You see Santa Costanza and part of other Constantinian architecture from the air here of the 4th century. And a ground plan showing you Santa Costanza, a sort of a very interesting circular building with tomb niches inside, later converted into a baptistry and oratorio for the church. Early Christian art, still borrowing from the Roman iconographical repertoire here. A mosaic from Santa Costanza showing grape harvesting, grape processing to make wine. And so the earliest Christian art and architecture grows out of the pre-existing Roman art and architecture, not surprisingly. In terms of architectural form, Christianity chooses the civic basilica, the Roman public building that used a nave, a central space, and side aisle arrangement as a large meeting hall, and the basilica becomes the standard Christian form and remains so in Roman Catholicism even today. During Constantine's reign, the original Church of St. Peter's was built. This reconstruction that you see here, how it may have looked around the year 320. Of course, the modern St. Peter's in the Vatican City sits directly atop this one, so this can only be conjectural. But we see how Roman architecture informs the emergent Christian architecture here in the 4th century. So let's summarize what we've talked about here. Roman religion it's a vast concept, right? And it covers a vast period of time. In pre-Christian terms, the votive religion of the Roman state is perhaps the most important organizing principle of how religion worked and how individual human worshippers interacted with divinities by going to temples, making promises, sealing those promises with gifts in hope that the divinity would in turn do a good favor for them. This votive practice is a key part of how both state and personal religion operated throughout Roman antiquity. The foreign cults, Mithras, Isis, Magna Mater, also embrace votive tradition, but also bring with them initiation. To be a member, to learn the secrets, you had to be initiated. You had to go through elaborate rituals to become familiar with the cult, to learn its ways before you could be shown the secret. One of the ways that the Christian cult gained traction, gained ground against these foreign cults, is that it was open to everyone. It did not require elaborate initiation rituals. It encouraged free gathering. It also made place for women, which most of the foreign cults did not admit women to their membership. And so gradually Christianity gains ground, gains followers, until in the 4th century it starts to get state-level recognition, again, mostly as a political move. Constantine may not have ever been a practicing Christian. His Christian conversion may have only come at the very end of his life, literally on his deathbed. It'll be in 391 when the Emperor Theodosius will ban the pre-Christian or so-called pagan cults of the Roman Empire, and Christianity becomes further cemented, entrenched as an official religion of the Roman Empire. Religious practice, ritual practice, is key to understanding any group of people at any period in time. And the Roman ritual practice certainly tells us a lot about them in terms of what they thought was important and how they interacted with the supernatural and what role interaction with the supernatural played in their daily lives.